come in and have a seat as we sip the tea of Season 2. My name's Adam.
And I'm Haley.
And this is Don't You Know?
The case of Miriam Rodriguez, a mother's love. In January 2014, Luis Martínez was called in the middle of the night by a strange man saying that they had abducted his daughter and that she would be murdered if he did not come up with $2,000. That was more than that. If he did not come up with $2 million for her safe return. His daughter Karen was abducted by an enforcement arm of a larger cartel called the Los Zetas. Unfortunately, this is not a rare event in this area of the world, which was San Fernando. Of course, the family was terrified, hurrying over the next several weeks to get a loan to pay off the gang. Miriam, who was in the United States at the time, quickly ran home so that she could be there for her daughter's safe return. They were able to secure a loan from the bank, who had special loans for these situations.
They got their special loans?
Yeah, like I said, this is not a rare event in San Fernando.
Okay.
People are getting abducted by the cartel and held for ransom all the time. Oftentimes, they are never returned.
Right.
Which is
sold.
Sold, murdered, kept, inducted into the gang. Sometimes there's a safe return. This is not one of those times. They met up with the cartel the next afternoon at the meetup spot, giving off the money. Miriam and Luis would be there, waiting for hours. Once the contact showed up, he quickly took the money, and Luis would hold on to it, not letting him go without any information about his daughter Karen. The contact said to go to a nearby cemetery, and Karen would be dropped off there in 20 minutes. That never happened. The next day, they would be called again that Karen was fine. They could not talk to her. They got to talk to her the first time. She told her dad, look, they just want the money. If you give them the money, they'll return me, and everything will be fine. They gave him the first installment of the money, then they wanted more.
They always want more.
They always want more. They wouldn't let them talk to Karen this time.
Was it the full $2 million, or was it just like a installment of like $1,000?
The first time, so they had initially given him a longer window to secure the loan, but as he's at the bank trying to get the loan, they were like, we want that money now. You have 2 hours to get to the spot. Bring whatever you can.
Yeah.
So they brought whatever they could. And again, they didn't have Karen with them. They waited in that cemetery all night. Karen was never there. They were contacted again the next day, saying that Karen was fine. They just needed more money. And once they gave them more money, they would let Karen go. They were fortunately a well-off family, especially for this area. They owned their own cowboy clothing shop called, I forgot, Rodeo something.
Cowboy.
Sorry, I read that after I wrote this up, and I dug in deeper. But yeah, they owned their own store, so they had collateral. Miriam scrounged up the next installment, a third installment, where she would go and meet the cartel members at a diner. And they said that Karen was fine, but she didn't want to come home.
Doubtful.
Very, very doubtful. After a few months, Karen would lose hope, and this is when she began her vigilante plan. She would contact the member that served as the connection, who said that he would meet with her for a small fee and would tell her what happened to Karen for another $2,000. She scraped this money together, and yet she was duped again. He would take her money, but he didn't tell her what had happened to Karen. All she had was his name, and that was enough. And in fact, it was a young man that she had known
before.
Yeah, since he was a kid.
Okay.
He was a little flower vendor. She would see him as a young teen, so it doubly hurt to have someone you know be a part of this, and someone who you would buy flowers from. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Karen, in fact, who was such a bright spirit, would help out. You know, she would go buy the flowers, and he's not such a bad guy. And turns out, yeah, he actually was.
Yeah, he was part of the cartel. I mean,
not good people. And in fact, this cartel was terrorizing San Fernando. They were part of a larger cartel.
Okay.
And, factions would break off into a couple of different subgroups, the Zetas being one of them. And their MO was to go out and kidnap people and keep them for ransom.
Get the money.
And either kill them or, in very lucky cases, continue. I mean, even the authorities were scared of them. They had no problem. It was the Wild West out there. They just terrorized everybody. Robbing people, assaults, all sorts of shit. Of course, Miriam would seek the help of local law enforcement, but there wasn't much movement on the case from their end. Again, they're overloaded, underfunded, understaffed. So over the course of 2 years, she would track down 6 members of the Zetas gang, starting with Sama. She had his name, and even though he kept a tight lip, his friends would post pictures in their work uniforms.
Okay.
And, from those little clues, she would use Facebook.
She got her detective on.
Yeah, she was very good detective. Scouring Facebook, she'd eventually come across, a picture of him and a friend that was dressed in her work uniform, which led her to an ice cream shop that Miriam would stake out for hours until she saw her target. Yeah.
She did the damn thing. She's like, I'm a fucking wait.
Yep.
I'm a fucking wait.
As soon as she sees him, the chase is on. Now she knows where to find Sama. It's the last one. She needs more of a clue, a lead. She recalls having an old uniform that she could use as a disguise. Miriam was hardcore. Her red, fiery hair, recent weight loss journey, body. She put on her old work uniform and she would go canvassing the neighborhood, going door to door and telling people that she was conducting a poll. After she did all of that hard work, Miriam was noticed by a federal police agent who was willing to finally lend a hand. For obvious reasons, the agent remains anonymous throughout the investigations and interviews and all of that. But he does have a quote in the New York Times. When she pulled her files onto the table, I have never seen anything like it. The details, the information gathered by one woman working alone, it was incredible. Now that she had the backing of the authorities, Sama was under scrutiny. He would evade arrest the first time. It wasn't long before he rolled over on his fellow gang members. When he was brought in for questioning, they shed more light on Karen's abduction. One member of the cartel surprisingly agreed to take them where Karen was murdered. Out in the middle of nowhere, there was a ranch turned mausoleum. Miriam accompanied the police to her worst nightmares. She found Karen's scarf, a cushion from her truck, and one of her femurs. Where hope had died, rage revived the fire that kept Miriam going. Knowing without a doubt that her life would never be the same, she dedicated it to bringing her daughter's murderers to justice. Through various means and methods, this feisty mama would track down 10 cartel members and bring them to justice.
She was like, I got your name.
I got your number, and I'm calling it. Some of them had even left the gang and was trying to live a normal life, but she would not let it.
Once a bitch, always a bitch.
You took my daughter's life, you don't get a chance at happiness. Miriam had no sympathy for their change of heart. It didn't take back all of the evils they had committed, all of the lives they had ruined, but they needed to be brought to justice. Why should they have peace and happiness when her daughter had been denied these?
Period.
They absolutely shouldn't. They should be weighed on the scales of justice, and Miriam made sure of that. I read there was one occasion where she was running down one of the gang members and held him at gunpoint with her .22 caliber pistol until the cops arrived and arrested him. There was another instance where she followed an ex-member to his church and had him arrested during service. There was some pushback from the congregation, but Miriam didn't give a damn. She had an agenda to fulfill.
Please don't arrest this gang member.
Hallelujah. He's in jail. Though her journey was dangerous, Miriam did not fear death. Her daughter had been stolen from her. Now her only purpose was to avenge that death. In 3 years, she almost single-handedly tracked down and aided in the capture of 10 cartel members. Like, dude, this is no fucking joke. This is who Liam Neeson based his role for Taken on.
That's amazing.
Probably
great.
not, but, like, she's got nothing.
Right.
Liam Neeson's got nothing on Miriam. Now, life can be no stranger than fiction, and this tale does take its turns. On March 29th, 2017, inmates at the Ciudad Victoria prison dug a tunnel and escaped, 3 of them being participants in Karen Rodriguez's kidnapping and murder. Because of this, asked for and was granted police protection, but sometimes even the best intentions lead to hell. On May 10th, 2017, which was Mother's Day in Mexico, 57-year-old badass Miriam Rodriguez approached her porch while balancing on crutches. Her foot was broken from a recent pursuit of a suspect. As she's getting to the door, a white Nissan meanders down the road driven by the escapees. They fired on Miriam approximately 12 times before driving off like cowards. Her husband would soon find her lying down in the driveway, one hand in her purse, grabbing for her pistol. A true cowgirl till the end, ready to light up some motherfuckers.
How petty do you have to be to fucking do a hit and run? Show your
On a
fucking face.
57-year-old badass?
Show your fucking face, bitch. Come
No
on.
way.
Stop and talk a while. Why not?
Of the 6 escapees, so of the 3 escapees that had to do with Karen's abduction, 2 were apprehended, and 1 was killed in a police firefight. So, at least there's that.
Yeah, you win some, lose some.
Miriam's death was not taken lightly. The community was enraged. Even the governor would tweet, "The government of, pardon my mispronunciation, Tamaulipas will not allow the death of Miriam Rodriguez to turn into yet another statistic." The authorities would go on to arrest 2 of the 3 escaped cartel members, and the 3rd would die in a gunfight. An unfortunate downside to Miriam's death was that it unraveled much of the work that she did. She had started collectives for people who were affected by the cartel. Her son would try to head up that collective after her death, but it would later dissolve. Her death was not for nothing. She set out to avenge the murder of her daughter, and she sure fucking did. This is how you do vigilante justice. A part of it that sucks is this isn't the San Fernando that Miriam had grew up in. She grew up on a ranch. It was a simple life, but it wasn't racked by the violence that her children, unfortunately, were subject to in their youths.
Right.
So it's a rather short chapter. There's so much more to it. I'll drop the sources. There's a great book. Fear is Just a Word, I think, that it's called. It really dives into the effect the cartels had on the area. Miriam's younger life, obviously Karen's younger life.
And cartels have a big presence in Mexico anyway.
Yeah, they do.
Like, that's where they thrive over there. And if I'm remembering correctly or not, the police... If I remember correctly or not, from what I've read, is Mexico's more ran by the cartel than it is the police.
Than it is the government?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So...
they're either working with them or blackmailed or...
something.
You know,
I could be wrong. Like, don't quote me on it, but...
No, there's a lot of corruption. I mean...
there's corruption everywhere.
There is. This is just more front-facing and violent.
Yeah.
They out there selling avocados and cocaine.
Avocados and cocaine.
2 very expensive white people treats. Quick little sip of vigilantism. Miriam Rodriguez brought her daughter's murderers to justice. Took on the cartel and won. For the most part.
Yeah.
Our next case is Darkly Dreaming Pedro. Pedro Rodrigues Filho.
They're not related.
They are not related. This is a serial killer turned YouTuber.
Love it, love it, love it. Yep.
May 24th, 1973. Brazilian authorities apprehend a young man suspected for murder. Officers put him in the back of their vehicle with another suspected criminal. The other's crime? Rape. This did not sit well with the young man, known as Pedro Rodrigues Filho. When officers transported the suspects, Filho would murder the other man without the cops noticing.
Period.
When they
I think that
he was just arrested for it. So
I guess everyone's innocent until proven guilty, but like, well, you win some, you lose some.
the man did confess.
Well,
to,
then period.
to Pedro. So it's like, if you shouldn't have been edgelord if you really hadn't done it. But yeah. When they opened the door, they would discover that only one of their 2 perps was alive. It was not the unnamed rapist. In fact, Pedro confessed to having killed the other man because he was a rapist, and Pedro would suffer no such criminal. This was not Pedro's first encounter with vigilante justice either. Just one of the many murders in a long history of taking out his dark desires on people his own size. For the most part. Little disclaimer, I'm not condoning vigilante justice. And especially in this case. In Miriam's case, she risked her life, but she didn't murder anybody.
Gotta put the disclaimer out there that you shouldn't take matters into your own hands. If you do, don't say we told you to.
Just saying we get it.
I understand. I can see the point of view.
Take my youngest daughter after everyone's independent and taken care of.
I wasn't done with that project.
Right?
I wasn't done with that one. I'd like it back.
She was only 20.
I wasn't done. I still wanted a razor.
Poor fucking people. Now, as I mentioned earlier, that was Pedro's first arrest, but not his first murder. Before we get into that, I want to dive into Pedro's background a little bit. Paint a picture for you. This chap had been dealt a shit hand, I'll say that much. But he played it the only way he knew how. There's an episode of Killer Psyche, hosted by former FBI profiler Candace DeLong, where she really dives into the psychology of old Pedro here.
Oh.
He's an anomalous serial killer in many different ways. The nature versus nurture had to take time out and work together on this one. They decided to take a detour from their classic sexually motivated mama trauma of your everyday sicko. Pedro wasn't known to be ritualistic in his murders either, and though he would admit that he killed for pleasure, he justified it by killing the bottom of the barrel of humanity and a few bystanders that happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Alright, now that we've got that out of the way, let's take a sip of the time tea and visit the fall of 1954, Santa Rita, Brazil. A mother is pregnant with her first child. She married an abusive, alcoholic narcissist, Pedro Sr., who would often come home drunk and beat her senselessly. Being pregnant would not quell his bloodlust either. He beat his pregnant wife so badly that he damaged his son's cranium in the uterus. Pedro would bear the mark of his father's anger his entire life, a dent in the front of his skull near his hairline. Pedro was the oldest, and he and his siblings would grow up watching violence daily. Their father would often beat their mother in front of them and even go so far as to discipline them harshly. Of course, that is no environment that a child can flourish in. When Pedro was around 14, he and an older cousin were playing near a cane press, which is something used to wring the sweetness out of sugar cane. This innocent afternoon would soon be the birthday of the monster lying dormant inside of the young lad. Pedro says that he pushed his cousin into the press after a trivial argument. Now, I don't know if there was any significant injury, but I know that he didn't die. Instead, Pedro came alive. He liked the power and control that he had over his cousin's life. He felt justified in his malice because he would suffer no disrespect. Soon after this, Pedro would drop out of school. There was no indication that this was because of his grades or disregard for education. He began working almost immediately after so that he could help out the family with finances or babysitting.
That is a common practice.
Yes, especially back in those days. In 1968, Pedro Sr. was employed at the local school until he was accused of stealing food. Philo was angered by the disrespect and the attempt to tarnish his family's honor. Sure, his father was a drunk bastard that beat his wife and children, but he was no thief, damn it. Philo's heart was heavy with the burden of vengeance. He would track down the deputy mayor for firing his father, deputy mayor being Minas Paris, and shoot him with his father's shotgun. The police were unable to solve the crime, so Philo sighed in relief and began planning his next murder. A month later, he hunted down the man who he thought was actually responsible for stealing the food. Armed with the same gun, Philo would fatally shoot the school security guard. Philo didn't trust Lady Luck to have his back twice, so he decided that he needed to get the hell out of Dodge. The 2 murders remained unsolved as he traveled to São Paulo, Brazil, the 13th largest city in the world. Alone and hungry, he would sign himself up with the Mogi das Cruzes gang. He would break into houses, stealing whatever valuables he could find. At some point, he would have an epiphany. If he stole from drug dealers, the authorities were less likely to get involved. How are they going to report $20,000 of drug money stolen? As with every killer, their crimes will escalate. It was no longer enough for Philo to steal from the bad guys, so he would end up killing one alleged drug dealer during a robbery gone wrong. He would allegedly kill another dealer while burglarizing his home. Unfortunately, I don't have many faces or names for the victims of Philo. They are by and large told through Philo's own confessions. He claims to have a body count of over 100, but was only convicted of 71. But I'm getting ahead of myself.
That's a lot of people,
That's a lot.
That's a lot.
Back in 1970, Philo was just 16 years old. He would meet the love of his life, Maria Olympia, who was pregnant with his first child. They were dating and had plans to be married. But before happily ever after could come, tragedy would strike. Philo and Maria would be targeted by a gang. During the attack, Maria would be isolated and murdered. Philo was heartbroken and bent on revenge. The self-proclaimed killer of killers would not settle for turning the other cheek. He hunted down the leader of the gang on the day of his own wedding.
Period.
You took mine, I'll take yours. Armed with guns and support from friends and family, Philo would crash the nuptials of the alleged gang leader's wedding, shooting 23 people, 7 of which would die from their wounds.
Okay, that's a lot of people.
That is a lot. And they were bystanders.
Yeah, I'm not for that one. I'm not for that one.
Many of these victims were innocent, but Philo could excuse me. But Philo couldn't have cared less. They were simply in the way, and everyone is guilty of something. To Philo, not only was this vengeance, but an act of community service. We also only have his word that this really was the gang that attacked him and Maria. For all we know, he was blind with fury, too broken to be judge, jury, and executioner. Philo had an odd sense of justice, little tolerance for what he perceived as disrespect for him or his family. The gunshots of his last firefight still ringing in his ears, he would visit his cousin's boyfriend for a little talk. His cousin was pregnant by the man, but he refused to marry her, instead choosing to leave. Philo would not take this for an answer, so he shot him. Here's a little sip of psychology for you, and disclaimer, I am but a simple monkey who just reads a bunch of shit. But I read, I don't speak.
Mm-hmm.
Criminologist Ronald Holmes, Stephen Holmes, and James DeBurger categorized serial killers on their motives. Based on Philo's confessions and interviews, he would be categorized as a missionary killer. A missionary killer is defined as a serial killer who finds a victim type they deem worthy of killing. Philo would target people he felt wronged him, or who had wronged society, or snored too loud, or got in the way of his killing. As I mentioned before, Philo breaks the mold when it comes to serial killers. He shared the same story of childhood trauma as many serial killers, but that's about the only thing he has in common with others. Often we'll see male serial killers target people they deem weaker than them. However, Philo would target large, burly men known for violence, and Philo himself wasn't a large man, which could be the reason behind his preference for guns and ambushing. Being that he was a missionary killer, he would forego ritual, only caring that his victim was dead. Philo would learn that his father was incarcerated for the brutal murder of Philo's mother in 1972. Pedro Sr. would stab her 21 times with a machete. He never gave a motive for it, just simply lost his fucking mind. Found out she was finally going to leave his deadbeat ass. Who knows what the fuck. Either way, this is how he signed his death warrant. Philo would saunter into the prison where his father was incarcerated, easily concealing a knife for the visit. He stabbed his father 22 times, one for each time he stabbed his mother, and one to grow on. He then cut out the man's heart and took a bite, chewing it for a while before spitting it out. This was the only murder that Philo would commit outside of his usual M.O. By 19, Philo had committed at least 10 murders, managing to evade justice himself, but not for long. Philo was known by authorities, and they were instructed to keep an eye on him and arrest him on sight. Unluckily for him, they did find him on May 24, 1973, where he was arrested along with another man, and as we mentioned earlier, killed him for raping. Now, Philo is off the streets, but he is still a danger and a menace. He is placed in prison, but to him this was the perfect hunting ground. Philo would murder anyone that he thought a detriment to society, the scum of the earth. That included his cellmate, who had deprived Philo of sleep because he snored loudly. It didn't matter if his victims were awaiting trial or convicted. Philo didn't have much discernment when it came to his judgments. There was no innocent until proven guilty. As far as Philo was concerned, everyone was guilty of something. This was the justification for a 34-year killing spree. In 2003, Philo was released, moving on to Fortaleza to become a housekeeper as he started over in life. He would keep his nose clean for the most part, except when he had participated in some prison riots, possessing illegal weapons and holding hostages. Here I'll note that the Brazilian legal system is strained. It's underfunded, understaffed, and people can wait many years in prison before they have a trial. Philo's first conviction, the one for 71 murders, he was only given, 30 years, because that was the max sentence for murder at the time. Right. It has been since increased to 40, but the judge had given him 360 years as an honorary sentence.
Right, okay.
He's like, legally I can only put you away for 30 years, but honestly you should be away for half a century. What the fuck? You out here killing people.
It's 71.
34-year killing spree.
Right.
So it took over 100 lives. So Filho would be arrested again for the deprivation of liberty, possession of illegal weapons, and threatening others during a riot. He was given another 4 years for the crimes and released in 2011 as a changed man. He would go back to being a housekeeper and make many friends. He would also create a YouTube channel called Pedrinho X Matador, a callback to his killer alias Pedrinho Matador, or Killer Petey. He would use
He really said, "Let me just make a handle real quick."
X Matador. Petey the previous.
See previous life.
He would use his platform to tell the story of his life as a cautionary tale to any youngins getting themselves caught up in trouble. He really did turn his life around, condemning his younger self for hot tempers and heavy resentment. He made many friends in his new life, making a small family and a loving community. Sadly, the past can rear its ugly head at the most inopportune moments. On March 5th, 2023, Pedro Rodrigues Filho would be killed outside of his family members' homes. The assailants drove in a black car, attacking him immediately. They would slash his throat and shoot him multiple times before fleeing the scene. Officers would later find the vehicle stocked with ammunition but have no suspects in the murder. One reason I was turned on to this was because there was a rumor going around the internet that Dexter Morgan. Have you ever watched Dexter?
I have not. No.
Okay, great show.
I want to. I just haven't seen it yet.
Fantastic. Highly recommend. Anyway, they said that Jeff Lindsay, the author of the Darkly Dreaming Dexter series, based his book on Pedro. And that's a prevalent rumor that is very untrue. I read many different articles claiming that Lindsay was inspired by these vigilante killings, but I never read it in any of his interviews. In fact, he says true crime and thrillers were never really his thing. He is a playwright interested in the arts and history. And in one interview, he says about the inspiration for Dexter Morgan, "I don't know. It just came to me. I was speaking at a business boosters lunch, and I don't know why, and I looked out into the crowd and thought, serial murder isn't always such a bad thing. And it just popped into my head. Can't explain it." So there's that.
That's it?
That's it.
Okay. And we are, for season 2, going to still continue the sip of stupidity because, come on, why not? So as the news article loads, I've chosen a different one now.
Okay.
So our sip of stupidity today will be Iowa man arrested for possession of fake ID that reads McLovin while at bar. This comes from, let me get my source correct, WSVN 7 News Miami on October 15th, 2019. So there's my source, written by Jahara Kaniti. An Iowa man has been accused of possessing a fake ID while at a bar. According to the Iowa Press, police arrested 20-year-old Daniel Alfredo Friday after officers spotted him with a drink in his hand. Police said when the officer confronted the suspect, he admitted that the drink had vodka in it and refused to show the officer his ID. Detectives said he was then taken outside of the bar and shown officers his real ID, which confirmed he was under the age of 21. Officers said they asked the suspect for his fake ID, to which he responded he didn't have one. However, the suspect went through his wallet. Police said they could see his fake ID that was his fake ID that was Hawaiian, a Hawaiian ID that said McLovin, date of birth 06/03/1981. According to the Iowa Press, when asked where he had gotten the ID from, the suspect responded that he got it from Amazon. Amazon always comes in clutch. Just saying. I don't condone getting fake IDs. Just saying. But also, McLovin is an awesome last name. This card is inspired by the 2007 film Superbad, where a teenage character used a fake ID bearing the same name to buy alcohol at a liquor store. According to Fox 11, authorities stated in the arrest report that the suspect smelled strongly of ingest alcohol and had slurred speech and bloodshot, watery eyes. He was also wearing a wristband from the bar, said police. The suspect was arrested and charged with public intoxication, possession of a fake ID, possession of alcohol while under the age of, and being at a bar after 10 p.m. while underage. That is our sip of stupidity, Mr. McLovin. That's all we have for you today, folks. My name's Autumn.
And I'm Haley, and we hope you were McLovin' it.
You can find us on every social media at Don't You Know Pod, and we hope you keep listening, and don't forget to lock your doors.